Thank you, and Jayan, to all of you. Uh, Today we are very eager to hear Gautam ji. You all know I have already shared his brief profile on Zoom meeting invite link. Uh, the What could be better than a speaker like Gautam ji, who has been 15 years plus on China, who he has been dating the China, and the topic is very interesting. So I would not be taking much time. I will be inviting Rotarian Prerna Gaikwad to for secretary announcement. So over to Prerna.
A very good morning to everyone. We have just one birthday this week. That's Junior Kiran, Kiran's daughter Dia's birthday on the 27th of this month. So here's wishing her a very happy birthday from all of us in advance. Those are all the announcements from me. Thank you. Back to you, Kanan.
Thank you very much. So I will be inviting Rotarian Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, uh, Corporate and Youth Connect Director, Rotary Club Pune Riverside, for formal welcome and introduction of keynote speaker Gautam ji. Over to Dr. Ganesh Natarajan.
Thank you, Kalal Mishra. Good morning to all of you. It is actually a real pleasure for me to introduce Ambassador Bambawale because, as most of you know, and I think Mukesh ji was mentioning before we started, that Pune is one example of a city which really epitomizes the spirit of collaboration and everybody want to do good for the city. And the Rotary Club, of course, is a classic example of that. But there is another institution which has very quickly, in a few years, become almost like a lighthouse for good people to come together and see what they can think about, what they can talk about. And that's the Pune International Center. And I think we are privileged that, both Mukesh and I, and of course, Gautam, are trustees of the Pune International Center. And I first met Gautam, I think it was 2 years back, when he was starting this Asia Economic Dialogue, which many of us attended the first time it was done. And as some of you may know, it is like the Raisina Dialogue, it is becoming a very important session because we really get multiple Asian leaders to come in, and the Ministry of External Affairs is our partner. And they were working with the Bombay agency for quite some time, and then we have got it for 3 years. And Gautam, of course, leads it with complete passion. And if any of you get a chance next year, please attend it because it is some of the most intellectual conversations and the most futuristic conversations on Asia, both economics and other matters, which is really amazing. So that's the first time I really interacted with Gautam. And then, of course, as most of you know, India had just started struggling with COVID in March, April last year, when suddenly the aggression by China happened. And I think Ladakh, Doklam are all now commonplace words. And then some of us were just discussing at the PIC saying that, look, with this huge military aggression, and of course, with the immediate response we had of apps band karo, ye karo, wo karo, etc., we said, look, is this response of India adequate? Or should we be more strategic in our thinking? And which is when Dr. Mashalkar, whom all of you know, he kind of tapped 4 or 5 of us. There's Ajay Shah, who's a very famous economist and professor at Jindal University, Ajit Ranade, who's the chief economist and president of the Aditya Birla Group, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, who of course needs no introduction, Gautam, and I. And I think we started discussing initially, saying what can we do? What has resulted in that is 9 months of extraordinary collaboration and great hard work, and something that has been one of the most enjoyable phases of my life. And our leader, without doubt, is Gautam, because Gautam brings with him a vision, a wisdom, a depth and width of knowledge, which is unparalleled, in my opinion. And when you hear him, you'll realize why I'm saying this. And now we are doing, literally every week, we are doing multiple conversations and debates for the All India Management Association, for CII, for Chennai Management Association. So all kinds of discussions, and we're all thoroughly enjoying it. So in all this busy schedule of really talking about India, China, and strategic patience, it was very kind of Gautam to accept my invitation to speak at the Rotary Club of Riverside. So without any further ado, and I will not read out his introduction, you all have it, but you all know his diplomacy background. But in terms of sheer understanding of the India-China situation and possible solutions, which we have talked about in our paper. And the paper was supposed to be a little 8,000 word paper. There's so much to be done that it finally became 56,000 words. And it's actually a book that is now being published by Rupa. But maybe Gautam will give you some hints of what has happened there, and also his own views on the whole gamut of diplomatic relations in the context of whatever is happening in the world. Over to you, Gautam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rotary Club of Pune Riverside. Thank you, Colonel Mishra. Thank you, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan. Thank you, Mr. Mukesh Malhotra, all of whom with whom I worked fairly closely. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. And what I'm going to try doing is try to explain to all of you what the Chinese have been trying to do in Eastern Ladakh since May of last year. And what are the implications of that, not just for India and China, for the relationship between India and China, but more importantly, what are the implications for us in India? So let me try to do that. And I would, of course, welcome questions, because I think it's only through questions and trying to answer them that we'll be able to clarify certain doubts that all of you might have about the situation there. As Dr. Ganesh Natarajan just mentioned, that in April of 2020, India was just girding itself, had just started the lockdowns to face the COVID situation, the COVID pandemic, which was sweeping the world at that time. And even as this was happening, we all now know that in early May of 2020, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, their army, the PLA, moved huge numbers of troops to the border with India, especially in Eastern Ladakh. And that led all of us to ask the questions as to why is it that the Chinese had chosen this particular time? What were they trying to do? What was the implication of what they were trying to do, etc., etc. Now, the first point I must make is that the number of troops that the Chinese moved to Eastern Ladakh was huge. It had never happened before, at least in the last 2.5 decades, since India and China had begun talking to each other, and since 1976, after the 62 war. We reinstituted ambassadors in each other's capital in 1976. And since then, we had been talking to each other about the boundary situation, about the boundary problem, about trying to resolve where the boundary between India and China lies. As all of you know, this is something we have not done in the past, and it is something we have not yet been able to do in the present. But to come down to early May of 2020, once again, the thing is that China moved huge numbers of troops, several divisions of troops into Eastern Ladakh, into that general area. And this itself, the moving of troops along with heavy armor and artillery, tanks, as many of you may have seen in videos that have come out in the recent past, all this movement of military might was itself an abrogation of all the agreements that India and China had signed to maintain peace on our borders, to maintain peace and tranquility in the India-China border areas. So what happened was that China not only moved huge numbers of troops, which had never been seen before, this kind of troop buildup, but also heavy armor, artillery, tanks, etc., which not only violated all the agreements that existed between India and China for maintaining peace and tranquility, but it also led to a matching buildup by the Indian side. So Indian Army and Indian Armed Forces also started building up from May of 2020. And then eventually both countries had roughly matching soldiers or troops facing each other in Eastern Ladakh, roughly 40 to 50,000 troops, which is a huge number, with, of course, heavy armor, artillery, etc. Now, the question that all of us would ask ourselves, and we have all been asking ourselves these questions. I know Colonel Mishra must have asked himself the question, as far back as early May of 2020, that what is it that the Chinese are trying to do? What is it that the Chinese are trying to signal to us? And here, my answer is that they're trying to do two things, or they're trying to signal two things. They're trying to say two things by moving their troops. One is, of course, a tactical aspect, and one is a more strategic aspect. So let me go into those two arguments. On the tactical side, it's quite simple. What the Chinese are trying to do is they're trying to get a better ground position for themselves in eastern Ladakh. And now, a year later, we can see that this has been one of their objectives, though it may not have been their only military objective. So they were trying to move their ground positions all the way to what, in their mind, in their conception, was the Chinese territory. So they were trying to do that. And as you can imagine, that both India and China do not agree on where this line lies. You can call it a boundary, you can call it a line of actual control, as people are calling it, and do call it, because that's what the literature terms it. But we do not agree on where this line of actual control runs or lies. So obviously there were differences of opinion between the Indian army and the Chinese army, between India and China. And therefore, India made a matching buildup of its own troops. And to a certain extent, I would say that the Indian army, the Indian armed forces have reacted magnificently. They have actually stopped the kind of advances that the Chinese may have wanted to make in eastern Ladakh. And to this extent, of course, I would say that the Chinese have not met all the military objectives that they may have started out with when they started this ball game in eastern Ladakh. Of course, as all of us know very well, and this was a very important turning point on the night of 15th, 16th of June 2020. For the first time in 45 years, you had, through hostilities between the two armies, loss of life amongst our troops and amongst Chinese troops also. So we know, for example, because our government was quickly off the mark in sharing this information, that at least 20 Indian soldiers, including a lieutenant colonel, died in the clashes that took place, the hand-to-hand combat fighting which took place on the night of 15th, 16th of June 2020 in Galwan. The Chinese were very cagey. They, at that point of time, did not accept any deaths. But from all the what we had heard from our troops on the front, we were quite confident that there were several Chinese soldiers who had also, who had also died in that incident. And the Indian Army had given a very good account of itself, even on that particular evening, on that particular night of 15, 16 June 2020. Later, of course, the Chinese have now accepted that 4 of their soldiers, including a senior officer, died on that particular night. They have also been given various kinds of awards and commendations and bravery medals, etc. But I would add that in our analysis, in our thinking, I think the number of casualties on the Chinese side may be significantly higher than the 4 that they have already accepted. But let's move quickly forward to what exactly were the Chinese wanting to signal from a strategic perspective. Now, from a strategic perspective, what they were trying to say was much more important. And here, this is the heart of my presentation to you today. What the Chinese were trying to say is that, look, guys, there is a significant asymmetry in economic and military power between China and India. If you just take GDP as an indicator of this asymmetry, China's GDP is roughly 14.5 trillion US dollars. India's GDP is 2.9 trillion US dollars. And the Chinese were trying to make the point, not just to India, but to the rest of Asia and perhaps the world at large, that look, there is only one major country in Asia, one big power, one big boy, one big daddy, one hegemon in Asia, and that is China. And all of you must understand this situation and fall into line, India included. Now, by moving our troops and preventing the Chinese from achieving all their military objectives in Eastern Ladakh, what we were saying in return is we do not accept this proposition that you are the big boys and that everyone else must fall in line, that there's a hierarchy of nations in Asia. And therefore, this is something that we did not accept, and we indicated it militarily. Now, once the Chinese had broken many of the agreements which were aimed at maintaining peace and tranquility, and remember, these are intergovernmental agreements signed by senior government officials on both sides, agreed to by the leaders of both countries. Now, all those agreements now actually lie in the dustbin of history. And they have been violated by the Chinese when they moved the troops to Eastern Ladakh in early May of 2020. And they do not have much significance today. Now, India was trying to indicate that we do not accept this proposition that China is the big boy in the room, that China is the big dad in Asia, that you are the hegemon in Asia. So it was very important for the government of India to back up our military response with a geopolitical and a geo-economic response. And that is why the government of India took this decision to ban several Chinese apps. It was part of the messaging that India was doing to China, that we do not accept your proposition that you are the only big boy in Asia. And in fact, what the Chinese were trying to indicate was that the 21st century was not an Asian century, which all of us tend to argue. The 21st century is merely and purely a Chinese century. So it was very important for the government of India to take these decisions in geoeconomics as well as in geopolitics. On the economic side, we took a whole series of decisions like banning certain Chinese apps, and those bans continue even today, like making it more difficult for Chinese investment to come into India. We put in layers of scrutiny. We also took other measures, including advising our companies like Jio and Airtel, etc., that let's try to reduce the Chinese footprint in our telecom industry, and definitely try to keep them out of the trials and rollout of 5G technology, which is currently underway in India. So these are various measures that India took on the economic side to indicate to China that if there can be no peace, if there is no peace on the border, then the rest of the India-China relationship is going to be negatively impacted. Geopolitically also, India continued to move with, say, for example, the Quad, the four countries which make up the Quad, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. As you can see that it has moved very rapidly over the last few months, say from October last year when there was a physical meeting of the Quad foreign ministers in Tokyo. And a few weeks ago, you had a virtual meeting of the Quad leaders, the president of the US and the prime ministers of the other three countries. So that is what India is doing geopolitically. Now, all of this, of course, is to indicate to the Chinese that if there is no peace on the border, if you have decided to break all the agreements that we had reached in terms of maintaining peace and tranquility in the India-China border areas, then the rest of the India-China relationship cannot continue to remain as it was. And this is exactly what is the playbook of China, that we will do what we can do militarily because of our greater strength on the border. But yet, in the rest of the relationship, where economics is concerned, where trade is concerned, where investment is concerned, things must continue as they were earlier. And India has indicated that we will not play according to the Chinese playbook. In fact, there will be implications for the rest of the relationship as the peace on the border has been disturbed. And that is why our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, keeps saying that the India-China relationship is at a crossroad. It is actually China which took the decision, and this decision wouldn't have been made lightly. It wouldn't have been made by a local commander of the PLA or by senior PLA generals. This is a decision which would have been taken at the pinnacle of power in China, which is by General Secretary and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, Xi Jinping himself, to abrogate all the agreements with India and move the troops in such large numbers, with heavy armor and artillery in eastern Ladakh. So India has now clearly indicated that if there cannot be any peace on the borders between India and China, the rest of the relationship will get impacted, and you can see that it is impacted. Now, therefore, in the coming weeks and coming months, I can share with all of you that I see the India-China relationship deteriorating much more than it has deteriorated today, because I do not see the Chinese and the Chinese leadership walking back on the decisions that they have taken on the military side. They were hoping that, as they had done in the South China Seas, that such military action will not impact the rest of their relationship, say with ASEAN in the South China Sea. But India has clearly indicated that this cannot be the case, and therefore it is something I predict that the relationship is going to deteriorate in the coming years, and all of you who are in business must expect an impact on trade, investment, and business also. Now, I know that all of you would be saying to yourselves, but a diplomat is supposed to build good relations. But I can share with you that at difficult times, it is our duty to tell the rest of the country, and this is what I'm telling you, that we have to indicate to the Chinese that we are ready to tolerate and face a worsening relationship between India and China across the board. Now, this brings me to my final point, and I'm going to stop there so that you can ask your questions. But the point that Dr. Ganesh Natarajan made, that how in the longer term, you see, this is not merely a military matter. It is not merely a military affair. It is a long-term game. And in the long term, how is India going to rise to this China challenge? And what we have argued in our paper, which has been jointly written by Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, in fact, I would say he was the guiding light behind the paper, because he was the one who kept pushing us to do the paper and to write it and to share it with policymakers across the board. And I can tell you that we have shared it with people in policy making, from the Prime Minister to the Defense Minister, the chiefs of defense services, the Army, Air Force, Navy, the National Security Advisor, and many, many others. But what we argue in the paper is that in the short run, because India holds a bad hand of cards, in the sense that we are economically and therefore militarily and geopolitically much weaker than China, in the short run, we will have to build balancing coalitions to ensure that our territorial integrity is maintained. And we will have to build balancing coalitions with three groups of countries. One is the major democracies of the world, like Japan, Australia, United States, France. Two is with countries who are on China's periphery, like Russia and Vietnam. And three is India's neighborhood. So countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, for example. So this is what we argue, that in the short run, India will have to build balancing coalitions with other groups of countries to stave off the China challenge. But in the long run, the answer is all economic, that we will have to ensure a fast return to 7 or 8% GDP growth per annum, so that the asymmetry, economic and by extension military asymmetry between India and China, will be reduced over the next 20 or 25 years. And we have projected that if we are able to regain the confidence of investors, if we can ensure that investment flows into the Indian economy again, and if we can ensure that India's economy grows at 7 to 8% GDP per annum per year, then by 2047, that is the year when independent India becomes 100 years old, or the Republic of India becomes 100 years old. At that point of time, if we have a 8% GDP growth rate from now on, and if China has a GDP growth rate of 5%, which is quite a realistic assessment, it's not very high, it's not very low, but it is what is being projected by economists. Then in 2047, on PPP terms, India's GDP will be roughly 64 trillion US dollars, whereas China's GDP will be roughly 88 trillion US dollars. But you will find that the asymmetry has decreased. India has grown as an economic power, and by extension, we will be able to build up our military and defense capabilities also. So I'm going to stop there, Colonel Mishra. I'm going to stop here, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, and hand the mic and the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before I invite Dr. Ganesh Natarajan to moderate the session, I would like to welcome Lieutenant General J.S. Chima, Param Visit Seva Medal, Visit Seva Medal, Visit Seva Medal, presently Vice Chancellor of Punjab Sports University, who has joined today. You are most welcome, sir. Then I would like to invite Colonel Sandeep Kumar, ex-CEO of 3x8 GR in Kargil and Siachen. Colonel Rajesh Jaiswal, Director Kundani School, is also with us, so hearty welcome. Group Captain UK Devnath, Air Force defense expert on many TV channels we have seen. He is today, so he will be most welcome to you, sir. Ruchi Mathur, CEO Lighthouse Pune, hearty welcome. Then we have Subhas Bal and Mr. Arjun. So very hearty welcome to all of you. Now I hand over to Dr. Ganesh Natarajan to moderate the session. Over to Dr. Ganesh.
Yeah, thank you, Kalman. I think there is a question from Elam, and I'm requesting any one of you who want to ask a question. I mean, you can either just say you want to ask or post it on chat, whatever is easier. And I would request friends of mine like Vikram, who has joined after a long time, and of course, Subhash, who's joining from San Francisco, and anybody else who has a question to do ask Gautam. And Gautam, as I said, has a very wide width of knowledge, so any questions are fine. But Zalem, you had posted a question, so would you like to ask it?
Yeah, my question is, first of all, thank you very much. It was really honor to listen to you. My question is, they must have prepared for this move very long, right? It is not overnight. And they must be finding the right time. So was this the right time? That is one. Secondly, isn't it this move China has done so that to deviate the investment from rest of the world when the world was thinking of taking out their businesses from China? And third is, will they go for war at any time?
Yeah. Shall I answer that, Ganesh?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
No, thank you very much. Those are all very good questions. So thank you very much for them. As far as preparations by China, I think, you must keep in mind that over the last 20 or 25 years also, the Chinese military budget has been growing every year, and in many years by double digits. So China has been building up its military capabilities steadily for the last 25 years, not just with India in mind, but in order to protect itself and in order to, all around to increase its capabilities. So as you know, for example, something which they never did earlier, but now today they are building their own aircraft carrier. So this is just an example of how over a long term of 20, 25 years, they have steadily built their military capabilities. Now, we also know that where India is concerned, where the India-China border areas are concerned, and where Eastern Ladakh is concerned, that over the last 10 to 15 years, the Chinese have also steadily improved and built the infrastructure, the roads, and also the railways in the areas which run right up till the India-China border. As a result, India has also started building roads in our side of the border, but there is a definite asymmetry where the Chinese road building activity and Indian road building activity is concerned. Also because of the terrain, because the Chinese are building on a plateau, the Tibetan plateau, whereas we are building in the Himalayas, where we have to, where we are on the wrong side of the mountains. Having said that, coming to this particular incident in Eastern Ladakh, which is continuing even today. So there has been a little bit of disengagement in one sector or one subsector, if you want to call it that, the Pankong So area. But in the other parts of Eastern Ladakh, there has been no disengagement and in fact, no de-escalation of troops. So the situation which started in early May 2020 continues even today and looks as if it's going to continue for a long time to come. For making such a move, obviously they would have planned for it for a few months. Definitely, they would have planned for it. Now, what I'd like to highlight is that the Chinese had basically two options. One is to peacefully continue negotiations with India on the boundary, or alternatively to use military force. And as all of you know, diplomacy and military are two sides of the same coin, and all my colleagues who are serving and retired military officers would agree with that. So what the Chinese have decided is that they will use military force. They didn't expect India to react the way we have. And I think this is where they have gone wrong. But I would believe that they would just go back to the drawing board, see where they have gone wrong, check what objectives they have not been able to meet. And I would think that in a couple of years from now, they will come back at us. So India needs to, also prepare itself. India needs to improve its game. And this is not merely on the military side. It is more importantly on the economic side. And I think, the question that you've asked has been very, very thought-provoking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gautam. We have three other questions, one from Vikram, then Ruchi, Mukesh. Vikram, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador, your talk has been very informative. But what we understand is that China has always been extremely expansionist whenever she's been strong. And in terms of strength, both diplomatically, militarily, I don't think she's been at a better position than now. Because at least from the numbers we see, for an economy stricken by the corona pandemic, and China doesn't seem to be affected at all, at least from the numbers that they declare. Do we anticipate, given the fact that China has always been building roads on and intruding, and this is the way they intrude, they keep changing their claim lines. Whenever they come for a discussion or a negotiation, they revert to some obscure treaty and say that this is our actual claim line, although this was the claim line that we said in our last negotiation. So they obfuscate all the time whenever there is talk about the boundary, especially in the east and in the north in Ladakh. The last time they did this, they built a road through the Exai, and now they're building roads in areas that are definitively claimed by India. And in fact, they are in possession of Indian territory, or at least the territory that we claim. Isn't this a good time for them to look at, the campaign season for them effectively will start sometime in August, September, October. And given the economy, given the state of the pandemic here, with a lot of the army also affected by the pandemic, restricted by the pandemic, do you think that we could expect some aggressive action sometime in September or October?
Shall I answer that, Ganesh? Because that was also asked by the earlier person. I sort of slipped out of it. But since it's been asked directly, and since I'm no longer, representing India, and I can be brutally frank, I think everything you have said is absolutely right. Vikram. And I think, yes, we should prepare ourselves for a possible Chinese attempt in September, October of this year. But I would think that, there have been what the Chinese, when the Chinese came in early May 2020, they must have had certain military and political objectives. Now, I believe, and I don't want to go into all the details because that will take another 1 hour, but I believe that only some of these military and political objectives were achieved and many of them were not. And the reason for that is I think that they didn't expect India to react in the way we have. So I would say that we have reacted in absolutely the right manner. And we have linked the entire relationship to peace and tranquility on our borders. I would think that they will go back to the drawing board and possibly not September, October 2021, but perhaps September, October 2022 come back at us after having taken corrective actions on the points where they must have found that there are certain weaknesses on their side. So that's what I would try to argue.
Ruchi, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, it felt like being in college and being in a lecture session, listening to you, Ambassador. Thank you. I was fortunate to be in the PIC session and the IMA session, and thanks to Colonel Mishra for inviting me. I immediately wanted to hear you. I wanted to understand that, it's like both countries are obviously reading, whatever documents are available and understanding where the other country is in their approach and in their thinking. And, number one, I'm curious to know that on what basis, what is our reading of China's intent, and the long-term intent. Like you talked about the tactical and strategic intent of the incident that happened last year, incidents. But what is their overall long-term? Is it about, politically also capturing the territory? Is it as far as that? Is it about, the modern form of colonization that, economically, it is, as if like basically India cannot retain its sovereignty vis-a-vis China, economically speaking, while, politically it may still be a sovereign nation. What is our reading of their intent? And if the intent is indeed, something which would be to us extreme, then they are not going to wait till 2047. So we should be having, what should our plan be? Is this really what our plan should be, what is laid out in the paper?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for that very interesting question, Ruchi. Very relevant and very, very good question. What is China's intent? I think the answer to any one of us who has been looking at China, reading about China, studying China for many, many decades is very, very clear. World domination. The Chinese today are completely focused on overtaking the United States as the preeminent superpower in the world, both economically as well as militarily. It's going to take time, but you can see that a kind of contestation has already started over the last few years between these two great powers. So the intent is very clear. Now, as part of that intent, and India is nowhere in the picture where that big picture thing in China is concerned, because as far as China is concerned, India is too small and too insignificant in this broader worldview that I have just painted for you. But where you are right is that China will do everything on the ground militarily to get into the most advantageous position as far as the border dispute, as far as the boundary question between our two countries is concerned. And that is what they have done in May, from May of 2020. And this is in one part, which is in Ladakh, in eastern Ladakh. Yes, you're absolutely right, 2047. But I think we should also understand that India has its own strengths. Militarily, we have shown, at least in one part of our border with China in eastern Ladakh, that we are able to build up our military strength and withstand the pressures from the Chinese army. I don't think at this point in time, in its contestation with the United States, which is the bigger picture, that China is going to start a full-scale, all-out war, as Vikram was saying, or one of our previous people was saying. I don't think the Chinese are going to do that. What they were hoping to do is continue to nibble at territory, because they have done that very successfully in the South China Seas, with no comeback from the ASEAN countries, including the ASEAN countries who claimed those parts of the seas. What India has done is it has given a strong pushback, saying we are not going to stand for this nibbling at our territory, making small military adjustments on our borders. And I think that is a very big difference between what China has experienced in the South China Sea and what it has experienced on the India-China borders. So I think it is not as if they're going to have a big scale war and run over India. No, not at all. I think India is too big a country. Also remember that, we can use the Mao dictum back at them, that we can draw them deep and then strike back at them. But let me not go into those kind of war scenarios which may alarm all of you. But I think the answer to the China challenge, as Ganesh and I have been arguing along with our other co-authors, is not so much on the military side. Yes, we have to, in the short term, have a military response. There's no doubt about that. And our military has responded magnificently. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And by the military, I mean not just the Indian Army, but the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy also. Those who know what is happening around the world will understand that point. But the answer to that is that, we cannot continue to have this asymmetry between India and China on the economic and by extension on the military, technology, education, science sides, which is a $14.5 trillion economy growing at 6% per annum, and a $2.9 trillion economy growing at 4.5% per annum. So we have focused our attention on that. And in the long run, the game is all going to be on economics and geoeconomics. So all of you who are, in business, and all of us, because we are in business also of a small kind, we need to gird ourselves. Of course, the government has to take the lead role. We argue in our paper that there are three big areas in the long run which the government needs to focus on, which is one, there is too much government micromanagement of the economy. Two, India is increasingly, even on the economic side, an administrative state where the administrators, the bureaucrats are playing a role in economic decision making. And third is, of course, there has been a slow but steady reduction in the rule of law. So we should once again ensure rule of law, so that every business has a level playing field. It is not as if because one business house has good relations with the governments of the state and the center that it does better than another. You should allow them to compete economically. So in the long run, that is going to be the game which India will need to win. And all of us as ordinary Indians can contribute and must contribute to that. So I hope I've been able to answer your very, very pertinent and very pertinent question. I hope I have given you some indication of my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gautam, as a diplomat, I want your view on yesterday. As you know, the Bao Forum was started in China, which is their annual show of strength as far as economy and everything else is concerned. And what President Xi there was talking about was much more in terms of global participation, collaboration in supply chains, etc. So given your view on world domination as their primary objective, do you think all that is just hogwash, and what they mean and what they say are completely different?
Absolutely, Ganesh. You have to be with the Chinese. Some people say in India too, but I would say that India is much more open and transparent than China. But with China, you have to be able to read between the lines, and there is much that is in between the lines. Look, it is very clear. You can see what President Xi Jinping has said yesterday at the Boao Forum. You can see what he said at the World Economic Forum in January of this year, as well as January 2 years ago. they talk about continuing globalization, etc. But what is not said, and this is very important, is that all that will happen with a change in the which country is the preeminent superpower, economic and military in the world, which is that the United States will be replaced by China, and then all of this must continue as it is. So you have to understand this and read between the lines. It is, as you say, hogwash, because the single-minded purpose that the Chinese have today is to emerge as the preeminent superpower of the world. This is what he means by the China dream. This is what Xi Jinping means by the China dream. And let me tell you, 1.4 billion Chinese people agree with him.
Oh, that
So
is
I'll
so
stop
true.
there.
Okay, well, I'll just get in a question from Subhash from California and then come back to Mukesh. Subhash, go ahead.
Hello. Thanks for a great session indeed. Really interesting. So I'll make some observations and then follow that with a question. So, so obviously, some of the weaknesses you pointed out about India, I think one of our other major problems is that we have hostile neighbors, relatively speaking, compared to China. So given that, and then in the past, it would appear as though India never aligned really solidly with any other big powers. If anything, it looked like India favored Russia maybe, but certainly not the Western countries. So now with the current proposal of forming good, deep alliances of different kinds, including Quad, I kind of feel that, living in the United States, for example, I don't see ever any US diplomat or official really giving any importance to India. So my question is, with our desire to form these various strategic alliances, how concerned are they or interested are they in forming really deep alliance with India?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question, very appropriate question to ask. Look, I must mention that, since this military situation has developed in early May of 2020 on our borders in Eastern Ladakh, on our borders with China, the United States has very openly, and this is for the first time, I think, in the last so many decades, the United States has very openly sided with India and has said that whatever India has been saying about the situation on the ground is correct, and whatever China has been saying is not absolutely accurate. So that is one big change which has taken place. Point number two, which I would like to point out, is that you have a new administration in the United States, a new presidency in the United States, President Biden. Look at the speed with which he wanted to have even a virtual meeting of the Quad, which is the leaders of the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. So all these are indications about the way the India-US relationship is going, including in defense and security matters where it is moving fastest. So I think that, yes, just as I said that China is laser focused on its contention with the United States, so too the United States is focused on two aspects. One is one is capacities at home, which have now been very openly seen in the rest of the world also as being inadequate and not that of a 21st century. And secondly, it is focused internationally on its contention with China. So it continues to do that. So I have a feeling that the India-US relationship is in a much better place than you described it, and that these coalitions are going to take. I didn't use the word alliances particularly because that's not liked in India, but we use the word, Ganesh and I, coalitions which is something we will have to do, because given the current asymmetry in power between China and India, unless we build balancing coalitions, bring in other countries, not in military terms, but in other terms, in terms of economics, in terms of education, in terms of science, in terms of technology, in terms of geopolitics, unless we build these balancing coalitions, we need to do that in order to stave off the China challenge in the short term. And I don't mean merely the military challenge. I also mean the challenge of asymmetry between our two countries. So I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Tony, back to you, sir.
Hi, Gautam. I don't mean to this thing, but we've been talking about asymmetry, which is a fact. There's no question about that. But if you look back in recent history, there are a number of examples where asymmetrical warfare of the military kind has been fought and won. I mean, Vietnam and Afghanistan, although not exactly our type, but are recent examples where superpower was challenged and more or less defeated. I mean, every economy, every power has its weaknesses and weak points. So what efforts, if any, are being made at our end to identify and exploit those weak points so that we can fight that asymmetrical warfare? I really feel that much as 2047 is a great target, it's too far away. And as Zelam said a little while ago, are they going to let us sort of reach that place in 25 years, or will they keep on, disturbing it so that that 25 becomes 50 or 60 or whatever it is? So should we not be looking at some ways of exploiting their weaknesses? And number two, I think one of the big problems in our setup here is the fact that unlike very few people in this country are China specialists. I mean, very little education of China, of the Chinese language, of their history, their way of thinking, etc., is being done at all. So isn't it time that if you want to meet that asymmetry and make some changes in that, or be able to sort of reduce that gap, that understanding and education of Chinese language, literature, philosophy, etc., also is increased at our end, and what are we doing about it?
Yeah, excellent questions, Mukesh, and thank you very much for them, because it does help in balancing out and what I've been saying. So when you asked about asymmetric warfare, let me say that yes, you are right. When you look at the big picture thing, that and use GDP as an indicator of the big picture asymmetry between China and India. China being a $14.5 trillion economy, India having a GDP of $2.9 trillion. The fact is that we have been able to militarily hold off the Chinese because of asymmetric, asymmetric warfare or asymmetric use of forces in Ladakh. So the fact that the Indian Army and the Indian Armed Forces have given such a magnificent account of themselves shows that there are certain things inbuilt into the situation where we had an asymmetric capability. Fighting at 14, 15, 16,000 feet, for example, I think our troops have shown that they were much better than Chinese troops. Which is not to say that in 2 years that kind of capability cannot be equalized, etc. So I would say that at the big picture there is asymmetry, but on the ground our troops have shown that asymmetric kind of use of force can save the day and can match the enemy. So I would agree with you that there has been a use of asymmetry on the ground level, especially in Eastern Ladakh. I'd like to target one of the other points you made, that 2047 is too far into the future. I'm sorry to say that we need to change our thinking, because the Chinese are not thinking merely about 2047, they're thinking about 2147. and we will need to do it.
Yes.
Not all of us, and I don't mean that you need to do it in business. Obviously, for you in business, every quarter is important. So you look at the next 3 months. But there has to be a capability in India, as you have rightly said in the second question that you posed, to think long term and to think strategic. And I would urge that, all of us can do that. So we must not just think about 2047, we have to think about 2147 also. Uh, Having said that, you are not wrong that, we do not need to replicate what the Chinese have done. We do not need to replicate the economic reforms and the GDP growth that they have achieved by doing things which they have done. No, that is not going to work because they're a different polity, a different economy, a different society from us. They're much more centralized. India is much more decentralized. India's strength lies in its people. And I agree with you that, the structure which we need to build in India, and we are moving in that direction. You will remember yourself that, the individual states of India had much less freedom in the past than they have today, both economic and financial. So we need to have a system in India, and this is what the paper that Ganesh, myself, and others have written about from Pune talks about, that we need to play to our strengths. We don't need to replicate what the Chinese are doing. We don't have to talk like Xi Jinping and act like Xi Jinping. We have to talk like Indians, and our strength is our people, and we need to give full, we need to give our people the um, kind of governance which is required to let them make their contributions in all fields, whether it's economy, whether it's science, technology, business, the arts, culture, etc., etc. So uh, I went off into a big picture thing again at the end, but I hope that answers your very pertinent and very good questions, Mukesh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gautam. I think that was as usual. It was really, really enlightening for all of us. Subhash, to answer your question, the paper, just send me a mail. I'll send you the paper. We've already released it publicly, so I can just mail it to you. Not a problem.
Ganesh, Prerna has a question.
Sorry, Sanjay, go ahead.
Prerna has a question.
They have time that I'll leave it to Colonel Mishra to decide whether we can take it.
Okay, one last question from Prerna we can take, no problem. Prerna, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. My question is a little different from what everybody's been asking right now. We were talking about banning a few Chinese apps, which we've already done. Boycott Chinese products. How exactly practical is that for India in today's scenario when we have Chinese products being used in every sector of industry right now and at a much lower cost than what they're actually produced over here?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent question, and I'm happy you have asked it, because that is something that we have very strong views on. I have very strong views, obviously. Look, we do not need to have a knee-jerk reaction to what happens or what is happening on our borders. You are absolutely right. Any kind of decoupling between the Indian economy and Chinese economy in the next 2 months is very impractical. I completely agree with you. At the same time, it cannot be business as usual. I'm afraid not. Because if it continues to be business as usual, as I've argued, we are playing according to the Chinese script then, where they are winning. It's a win-win for them. They win both times. They win on the military side, on the border, and they win on the economic side in trade and investment with India. So we cannot have it business as usual. And therefore, I'm afraid that we will have to make changes in our industrial structure so that at least those products, and I can think of, for example, in the pharma sector, APIs, where India has a competitive advantage. We need to rebuild those industries. And all of us in Pune remember Hindustan Antibiotics, how it has gone to seed, stopped functioning, become bankrupt. But that is a kind of reorganization that we will have to do. And this is only an indicative idea that I'm putting forth to you. We will have to look for alternate supplies. We will have to produce some of those things in India. We will have to become part of global supply chains, including some of that supply chain should be located in India. And that is a much longer term question. And that's why I look out to 2047. Ganesh and I both look out to 2047, because over the next 25 years, that is possible. So no knee-jerk reaction, no immediate decoupling in a few months. That is impossible. Totally agree with you. But in the longer term, we all better pull up our socks and make India an economic success. Because if we don't, then we will have to kowtow to the Chinese. We will have to accept Chinese as the #1 power in the world and in Asia. And if you want that to happen, I'm okay with it. But many of us, like Colonel Mishra, Ganesh, myself, and I'm sure Mukesh Malhotra also, don't want that to happen. So in that case, we need to pull up our socks and we need to start doing it today so that its impact will be felt in 2047.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gautamji. In fact, we are blessed to have you today morning. Your talk has been quite interesting. Rather, I must say, stunning, mind-blowing, and thought-provoking. We have been benefited from a person who has dealt, China, Pakistan, and Nepal, all the three neighboring countries. So, not taking much time, once again, thanking you. And other esteemed guests to whom I have mentioned in my earlier when I welcome them. I would like to invite charter member and honorable board member, Rotary Club Pune Riverside, Rotarian Mukesh Malhotra, to extend formal vote of thanks. So over to Mukesh.
Thank you, Colonel Saab. It's usually a cliche to say that it is my pleasure to extend this hearty vote of thanks. But honestly, Gautam, today it is indeed really a pleasure for me to extend this vote of thanks. It's people like you and Ganesh and others of the PIC who raise people's awareness. And I think that is the most important task that we need to do, that all of us who are in our own little cocoons, we all need to have our awareness raised as to the challenges we are facing and the possible solutions to it. It's only when enough people in this country are aware of the issues involved and aware of what the problems are and aware of what the future may look like if we don't take immediate steps to change it, that some changes will happen. Otherwise, we are all more interested in Mandir Masjid than election today, state election here, state election there. And we're not at all bothered about the larger global picture, which I think is so very important. And which is why I'm not just thanking you for this talk to our club, but I'm thanking you for making people aware through that paper and that book that you have authored along with Ganesh and others, to make people aware and to give us all a little bit of a jolt in our backsides, so that we actually move towards doing something and that we reduce or eliminate, if possible, the asymmetry that exists today. And we should all be aware of it. Thank you very much. And I would love to have a personal discussion with you sometime, but that's for another day. Thank you very much for talking to us today and wish you all the very best. May you keep on producing more such papers and may you keep on inspiring and awakening all of us who don't know enough about these matters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And before meeting is adjourned, I would like to have one announcement. On coming Wednesday, 28 April 2021, we have our own member, Rotarian Bikram Puri, who is the honorable board member. He is going to speak on a very interesting topic. I will not share that. That will be shared by him only on that day. So please join on that day in large number. Time has already, it is over. Once again, thanking you all. Stay safe, healthy, and happy. Please allow me to end the meeting. Meeting is adjourned. Should I? Thank you, Jai Hind, and good day to all of you. Recording will be sent to you. Yes, we have recording, and recording will be sent to all.